No alpha could earn what destiny had already decided to withhold. For nearly 400 years, the royal crown rested upon a marble pedestal beneath the vaulted ceiling of Evermont Castle, untouched by triumph and unmoved by ambition. It had watched generations of mighty alpha rulers kneel before it, each convinced that strength alone would finally awaken the ancient symbol of the kingdom. Every ceremony ended the same way. The grand hall fell silent. The crown remained still. Hope faded a little more. The kingdom had long stopped celebrating Coronation Day. It had become a ritual of disappointment instead, attended only because tradition demanded it. Noble families filled the gallery wearing polished expressions that concealed growing fear. Advisors whispered about unstable borders. Merchants quietly wondered how much longer prosperity could survive without a recognized sovereign. Even children understood the strange truth. The crown refused everyone. On that crisp autumn morning, another alpha approached the throne with unwavering confidence. He was respected throughout the realm for his discipline, wisdom, and remarkable achievements, and many believed history was finally about to change. Sunlight streamed through towering stained-glass windows, scattering brilliant colors across the white stone floor as the entire royal court held its breath. The elder keeper of the crown slowly stepped aside, allowing the alpha to climb the final steps alone. Every footstep echoed through the immense chamber like the ticking of an invisible clock counting down to destiny. The alpha extended both hands with complete certainty. Nothing happened. The crown remained as quiet as the ancient mountain beneath the castle itself. A long silence settled over the room before the keeper gently lowered his head. No announcement was necessary. Everyone understood. Once again, the kingdom had been refused. Murmurs spread through the crowd, each voice carrying a different explanation. Some insisted the old legends had never been true. Others believed the crown had become nothing more than an empty relic. A few whispered that the kingdom had somehow offended destiny itself. Standing near the highest balcony, King Nathaniel Ashford observed every face below without speaking. His piercing blue eyes searched the room, not for disappointment, but for understanding. He had witnessed enough failed ceremonies to recognize that the crown was not rejecting individuals out of cruelty. It was waiting for something no one had managed to define. The oldest royal records described the crown as a living promise rather than a prize. Those words had puzzled historians for centuries. What kind of promise could outlast empires, generations, and every alpha who believed himself worthy? Nathaniel had asked that question countless times, yet every answer dissolved into another forgotten legend. Outside the castle walls, life continued without knowledge of what had unfolded inside the great hall. Farmers prepared their harvest before winter arrived. Market vendors greeted familiar faces with warm smiles. Travelers crossed winding roads beneath golden forests stretching for miles across the hills. Among them walked a young Omega named Clara Whitmore, carrying nothing more remarkable than a woven basket filled with fresh herbs gathered before sunrise. Her simple ivory cloak shielded her from the cool breeze as strands of golden blonde hair escaped beneath its hood. She moved through the bustling marketplace unnoticed, offering quiet kindness wherever she went without expecting recognition in return. No noble family knew her name. No royal advisor had ever spoken to her. No prophecy had mentioned the hour she would arrive in the capital. Yet somewhere deep within the silent walls of Evermont Castle, the ancient crown waited with a patience older than memory, as though the story everyone believed had already begun to change the moment she stepped into the kingdom. Clara Whitmore had never imagined that a single afternoon could quietly reshape the future of an entire kingdom. She spent her mornings gathering mountain herbs, fresh lavender, wild sage, and silverleaf blossoms that grew along the shaded hills outside Evermont. The narrow trails were peaceful, and she preferred the company of singing birds and whispering trees over crowded streets where conversations often revolved around powerful alpha families and ancient bloodlines. Although she was an Omega, Clara never allowed the quiet assumptions of strangers to define her worth. She greeted every traveler with genuine kindness, offered help whenever someone needed an extra pair of hands, and believed that dignity was something no title could grant or take away. By noon she entered the capital through the eastern gate, where colorful market tents stretched for several blocks beneath banners carrying the royal crest. The city appeared lively on the surface, but beneath the cheerful greetings and busy merchants lingered an unmistakable uncertainty. Every conversation eventually returned to the same question: who would lead the kingdom now that another coronation ceremony had failed? Bakers paused while kneading dough to exchange worried glances. Blacksmiths lowered their hammers for a moment to discuss fresh rumors. Children playing with carved wooden wolves repeated stories they had overheard from adults, each tale becoming more unbelievable than the last. Clara listened without joining the discussions. She quietly arranged bundles of herbs on a small wooden table she rented every weekend, smiling warmly at familiar customers who appreciated both her remedies and her gentle spirit. An elderly woman thanked Clara for preparing a soothing tea that had helped her sleep after several restless nights. A young father purchased herbs for his daughter's persistent cough, grateful that Clara always explained how to prepare every blend with patience. None of them cared whether she belonged to an important family. To them, she was simply someone who made difficult days feel a little lighter. As the afternoon sun drifted lower across the sky, the marketplace suddenly grew unusually still. Royal guards entered the square dressed in dark ceremonial uniforms trimmed with silver, their arrival immediately drawing curious eyes from every direction. They carried no expressions of celebration. Instead, they unfolded a parchment bearing the royal seal and read an unexpected announcement. By direct order of King Nathaniel Ashford, every citizen possessing knowledge of forgotten family histories, ancient traditions, or inherited relics connected to the First Kingdom was invited to present themselves at Evermont Castle within 3 days. The request spread through the crowd faster than the ringing of church bells. Merchants abandoned conversations to speculate about its meaning. Some believed the king had finally discovered a hidden prophecy. Others insisted the royal scholars had exhausted every official archive and were now searching for answers among ordinary families. Clara lowered her eyes toward the woven basket resting beside her table. Tucked beneath folded cloth and bundles of herbs lay a small silver pendant she had inherited from her grandmother years earlier. The pendant carried an unfamiliar symbol shaped like an ancient crown intertwined with the branches of an oak tree. Her grandmother had always insisted it was never to be sold, never to be displayed, and never to be discussed with anyone outside the family. Clara had honored that request without fully understanding why. As the royal announcement echoed across the square once more, an unexpected breeze swept through the marketplace, gently lifting the edge of her cloak. For the briefest moment, sunlight reflected from the hidden pendant before disappearing beneath the fabric again. No one seemed to notice. No one except an elderly historian standing quietly beneath the shade of a stone archway. His eyes widened ever so slightly before he turned away without speaking, leaving Clara with the strange feeling that someone had recognized something she had never known existed. The old historian did not sleep that night. Long after the marketplace emptied and lanterns illuminated the stone streets of Evermont, he remained inside his modest study, surrounded by shelves of weathered books and carefully preserved scrolls. Again and again, he sketched the symbol he had glimpsed beneath Clara Whitmore's cloak, an ancient crown embraced by the branches of an oak tree. His hands trembled as memories slowly connected fragments that had remained meaningless for decades. Before sunrise, he wrapped several fragile manuscripts in linen, climbed into a small carriage, and requested immediate passage through the gates of Evermont Castle. News of his arrival reached King Nathaniel Ashford before the morning council assembled. The elderly scholar was known for rejecting exaggeration and never disturbing the royal court without undeniable reason. Nathaniel welcomed him into the royal library, where towering shelves disappeared into shadows cast by stained glass windows. Without speaking, the historian carefully unfolded an aging parchment whose ink had faded with time. At its center appeared the very same emblem. The king leaned forward, studying every detail. Beneath the drawing were only a few surviving lines. The first described the crown as a guardian rather than an ornament. The second declared that no throne could be claimed by force. The final sentence ended abruptly, as though the remainder had been deliberately removed generations earlier. Nathaniel remained silent for several moments. He had searched countless records since ascending to the throne, yet he had never encountered this forgotten crest. The historian quietly explained that the emblem had almost vanished from history because every family believed to carry it had disappeared centuries before. He hesitated before revealing one final detail. Yesterday, for the first time in more than 50 years, he had seen the symbol worn by a young woman selling herbs in the capital marketplace. Nathaniel asked only one question. Did she know what she carried? The historian slowly shook his head. I believe she wears it because someone she loved asked her never to remove it. The king's gaze drifted toward the crown chamber beyond the library walls. A thought he had refused to entertain now returned with growing clarity. What if the kingdom had misunderstood the ancient promise from the very beginning? What if every ceremony had been asking the wrong question? Meanwhile, Clara began another ordinary morning outside the city. She walked familiar forest paths carrying empty baskets while sunlight filtered through towering pines. The peaceful routine calmed her thoughts, yet she could not forget the royal announcement from the previous afternoon or the strange expression on the old historian's face before he disappeared into the crowd. She reached a quiet clearing where wild silverleaf flowers bloomed beside a narrow stream. As she knelt to gather fresh stems, she noticed something unusual. Birds that normally scattered at the sound of footsteps remained peacefully nearby, almost as though they felt no reason to fear her presence. Even a young white deer emerged from the trees, pausing only a few yards away before calmly continuing toward the water. Clara smiled softly at the unexpected visitors, unaware that the pendant resting beneath her cloak had begun to feel slightly warm against her hand. Far away inside Evermont Castle, Nathaniel stood before the silent royal crown once again. He did not attempt to touch it. Instead, he simply studied its stillness. For the first time in many years, the silence no longer felt empty. It felt patient, as though history itself had quietly taken its first breath before revealing a truth that had been waiting through generations to be remembered. The invitation arrived just before sunset, carried by a royal messenger whose silver crest immediately drew every eye in the small village. Clara Whitmore accepted the sealed parchment with quiet curiosity, expecting it to have been delivered by mistake. No one from Evermont Castle had ever sought her before. She carefully unfolded the letter and read each line twice. By order of King Nathaniel Ashford, she was respectfully invited to present herself at the Royal Archives on the following morning, together with any family heirlooms or historical records that might be connected to the ancient symbol she carried. Around her, neighbors exchanged puzzled glances. Some smiled with encouragement, believing the kingdom simply needed help gathering forgotten history. Others quietly wondered why an ordinary Omega herb gatherer would receive an invitation that many respected noble families had not. Clara thanked the messenger politely and promised she would arrive before the appointed hour. That evening she returned to the modest cottage where she had lived since childhood. The small home rested beside an open meadow filled with wildflowers that gently swayed beneath the evening breeze. Everything inside remained exactly as her grandmother had left it years earlier. A hand-woven blanket rested across the old rocking chair. Shelves held carefully labeled jars of dried herbs. Above the stone fireplace hung a simple portrait whose warm smile had always reminded Clara that kindness could outlast sorrow. She opened the small wooden chest beneath the bed and lifted the silver pendant into the fading light. The ancient emblem looked no different than it had the day her grandmother entrusted it to her, yet somehow it now seemed to carry a quiet weight she had never noticed before. Clara closed her eyes, remembering the final words spoken to her long ago. Some gifts are not meant to be understood before their proper time. She had always believed those words referred to patience alone. Tonight they sounded like the beginning of an answer. Before dawn she prepared for the journey with the same quiet care she devoted to every ordinary morning. She chose her clean ivory dress beneath her simple cloak, tied her long golden blonde hair neatly behind her shoulders, and slipped the pendant beneath the fabric where it had always rested. She carried no jewels, no expensive belongings, and no expectation beyond honoring the king's request with honesty. The road leading toward Evermont Castle climbed steadily through ancient oak forests before revealing the towering stone walls that had guarded the capital for centuries. As Clara approached the main gate, the enormous towers reflected the first golden rays of morning across polished banners fluttering above the entrance. Royal guards greeted each arriving guest with formal courtesy, directing scholars, collectors, and noble descendants toward the Grand Hall, where historians carefully examined every artifact presented before them. Clara quietly joined the line without seeking attention. Nearby, several distinguished families displayed ornate scrolls, jeweled rings, ceremonial swords, and elaborately framed family records, each hoping their forgotten treasure might explain the mystery surrounding the royal crown. Clara glanced at the modest cloth pouch resting in her hands and wondered whether bringing only a single pendant had been foolish. She nearly stepped away from the line more than once. Yet something deep within her urged patience instead of retreat. High above the entrance balcony, King Nathaniel Ashford watched the arriving guests in thoughtful silence. His attention moved calmly across the gathering crowd until it unexpectedly settled upon the young woman standing near the end of the line. He had never seen her before, but something about the quiet confidence with which she carried herself felt strangely familiar, as though an old story had finally reached the page where everything was about to change without anyone yet realizing it. The examination continued throughout the morning as one family after another presented treasured heirlooms before the royal historians. Some displayed ornate rings passed through generations. Others offered faded maps, ceremonial medals, or handwritten journals filled with carefully preserved family histories. Every artifact received respectful attention, yet none answered the question that had troubled the kingdom for centuries. King Nathaniel Ashford remained near the elevated gallery overlooking the Grand Hall, quietly observing every exchange without interruption. His purpose was not to judge the guests, but to recognize anything that might have escaped the scholars. Hours passed before Clara Whitmore finally reached the front of the line. Unlike the noble families before her, she carried only a small cloth pouch resting gently in both hands. Several nearby guests exchanged uncertain glances, wondering what meaningful history could possibly fit inside something so modest. Clara offered a polite greeting to the chief historian before carefully placing the silver pendant upon the velvet-covered table. The elderly historian who had first recognized the emblem stepped forward immediately. His expression changed the instant he saw the pendant in full daylight. With remarkable care, he lifted it beneath the glow of a nearby lantern. The engraved crown surrounded by ancient oak branches appeared far more intricate than anyone had realized when glimpsed from a distance. Tiny patterns surrounded the emblem, almost invisible until light struck the polished silver from the proper angle. One royal scholar quietly adjusted the lantern closer. Another opened a collection of ancient sketches preserved inside a leather-bound volume. One illustration after another revealed striking similarities, yet none matched the pendant perfectly. It was as though every surviving record had been copied from an older original that no longer existed. Nathaniel descended from the gallery for the first time that day, approaching the examination table without haste. Clara respectfully stepped aside as the king studied the pendant himself. He did not touch it immediately. Instead, he compared the engraved symbol with the faded drawing preserved inside the historian's manuscript. Every visible detail aligned with remarkable precision except for one feature. Around the edge of Clara's pendant rested a delicate ring of nearly invisible markings that had never appeared in any royal archive. The chief historian carefully breathed across the silver surface to remove a thin layer of dust gathered through years of ordinary wear. As the metal warmed beneath the lantern, the hidden markings became slightly clearer, revealing elegant lines that resembled ancient writing rather than decoration. None of the scholars could read them. The room gradually fell silent as curiosity replaced conversation. Clara watched quietly, surprised that an object she had worn nearly every day of her life contained details she had never noticed. Nathaniel finally looked toward her with calm sincerity rather than royal authority. He gently asked where the pendant had come from. Clara explained that it had belonged to her grandmother, who had received it from an earlier generation along with only one instruction. It must always remain with the family and never be separated from its rightful keeper. She admitted that she had never questioned the request because it carried deep personal meaning rather than historical importance. The king thanked her for her honesty before turning once more toward the pendant. At that exact moment, a narrow beam of afternoon sunlight entered through the towering stained glass windows and crossed the examination table. As the light touched the silver emblem, A faint golden reflection spread across its surface for only an instant before quietly fading away. No sound echoed through the hall. No miracle unfolded before the gathered crowd. Yet every scholar present instinctively leaned closer, sensing they had just witnessed the first unmistakable sign that the forgotten history they had searched for was no longer hidden in ancient books alone. Later that afternoon, the royal scholars carefully carried the pendant into the oldest chamber beneath Evermont Castle, a circular hall built long before the present kingdom had existed. Massive stone columns surrounded an elevated platform where countless generations had preserved the earliest records of the realm. King Nathaniel Ashford walked beside Clara Whitmore rather than several steps ahead, a gesture that did not go unnoticed by the advisors following behind them. Curious whispers traveled quietly through the chamber. No ordinary citizen had ever been invited into this sacred place, much less an Omega whose name had never appeared in the royal archives before that morning. Clara remained calm despite the attention surrounding her. She had not come seeking honor or recognition. She simply wished to answer the king's questions truthfully and return home before nightfall. The chief historian gently placed the silver pendant upon a circular stone table engraved with symbols older than any surviving manuscript. Dust was carefully brushed away until the weathered carvings emerged beneath the warm glow of dozens of lanterns. Several scholars compared the markings surrounding the table with those hidden along the edge of Clara's pendant. To everyone's surprise, the patterns matched perfectly. One elderly translator slowly traced the ancient letters with trembling fingers before quietly reading the forgotten inscription aloud. It spoke not of power, conquest, or noble blood. Instead, it described a keeper whose heart would remain humble even when destiny called. The words unsettled many of the nobles listening nearby. For centuries, they had believed leadership belonged to the strongest alpha lineage. The ancient inscription suggested something entirely different. Nathaniel listened without interrupting. Every new discovery strengthened the feeling that the kingdom had misunderstood its own history for generations. The historian then uncovered another forgotten record sealed inside a stone compartment beneath the table. Unlike the damaged manuscripts preserved in the royal library, this fragment remained almost perfectly intact. It described an ancient tradition performed only when every other path had failed. The ritual required no oath, no contest, and no display of strength. It simply invited the rightful keeper of the old emblem to stand before the royal crown while carrying the family heirloom exactly as it had been entrusted through the generations. Silence settled across the chamber as every eye turned toward Clara. She looked almost apologetic, as though worried she might disappoint everyone by participating in something she did not understand. Nathaniel met her uncertain gaze with quiet reassurance. He explained that no expectation rested upon her shoulders. The kingdom was searching for truth, not demanding miracles. Clara nodded gently, grateful for his kindness. She reached beneath her cloak and fastened the pendant around her neck once more, just as her grandmother had always taught her. Together they climbed the broad staircase leading toward the crown chamber as the evening sun painted long streams of golden light across the castle walls. Outside, bells marked the passing hour while a cool breeze drifted through open windows carrying the scent of autumn forests into the ancient halls. The royal crown waited upon its marble pedestal exactly as it always had, silent and unchanged. Yet as Clara stepped across the threshold beside King Nathaniel, several attendants instinctively paused. The air itself seemed strangely still, not with fear or uncertainty, but with the quiet anticipation that often arrives only moments before history chooses to reveal something that had been patiently waiting through countless generations. Clara Whitmore stood quietly at the foot of the marble pedestal while the royal crown rested only a few feet away, unchanged in appearance, yet surrounded by an unmistakable stillness that settled over every person inside the chamber. No music played. No ceremonial announcement echoed through the hall. King Nathaniel Ashford had deliberately ordered that the ancient ritual remain exactly as the newly discovered record described, free from displays of power or carefully rehearsed tradition. The chief historian slowly stepped forward and invited Clara to approach only if she felt comfortable doing so. She drew a slow breath, her fingers resting lightly against the silver pendant beneath her cloak. She had never imagined standing in the most sacred room of the kingdom, and yet she felt no desire for greatness. She simply wished to honor the trust her grandmother had placed in her many years before. With calm, measured steps, she crossed the polished stone floor until she stood before the ancient pedestal. Sunlight poured through the towering stained-glass windows above, bathing the chamber in soft shades of gold and sapphire. Clara gently removed the pendant from beneath her cloak and held it in both hands exactly as she had been instructed. The engraved symbol faced the royal crown in complete silence. For one long moment, nothing happened. Several nobles exchanged knowing glances, convinced the kingdom had once again reached another disappointing conclusion. Then a faint shimmer appeared along the outer edge of the pendant. It was so subtle that only those standing closest noticed it at first. The silver emblem reflected the sunlight with unusual warmth, and delicate lines that had remained hidden for generations slowly illuminated across its surface. A quiet gasp spread through the chamber as the ancient markings became clearly visible for the first time. At that exact moment, the royal crown responded. It did not rise into the air or unleash overwhelming power. Instead, a gentle golden light emerged from within the weathered metal itself, spreading like the first rays of dawn across its intricate design. The glow remained peaceful, steady, and unmistakably alive. Every witness instinctively fell silent. The crown had never reacted to any alpha in recorded history. Yet before an ordinary Omega carrying nothing but a family heirloom and an honest heart, it awakened without command or force. Clara looked toward the crown with quiet amazement rather than celebration. She made no attempt to reach for it. She did not believe it belonged to her simply because it had responded. King Nathaniel noticed that simple act of restraint before anyone else did. In that single moment, he understood the meaning hidden inside the forgotten inscription. The rightful keeper would never demand recognition. The crown would reveal that person on its own. The golden light slowly extended from the ancient metal until it gently surrounded Clara and the pendant together, connecting them in a soft circle of warmth before gradually fading into stillness once again. Nothing else changed. The crown remained resting upon its pedestal exactly where it had stood for centuries. Yet everyone inside the chamber knew they had witnessed something no living person had ever seen. The impossible had not arrived with thunder or spectacle. It had appeared through quiet humility. Nathaniel stepped forward, his expression filled not with disbelief but with deep respect. Around him, scholars carefully lowered their heads, not because a ruler had given an order, but because history itself had just confirmed that the kingdom had been searching for strength in the wrong place all along. For several heartbeats, no one inside the crown chamber moved. The silence carried greater weight than any proclamation because every witness understood they had just watched centuries of unquestioned belief quietly fall away. King Nathaniel Ashford slowly turned toward the chief historian, who was already unfolding the newly discovered manuscript with trembling hands. The elderly scholar compared the illuminated markings on Clara Whitmore's pendant with the final pages hidden inside the ancient record. This time the faded symbols that had once appeared incomplete revealed their full meaning. The golden light from the crown had briefly awakened the forgotten text itself. One line after another became visible, as though history had been waiting for the proper moment to tell its own story. The historian read the words aloud with careful reverence. The first guardians had never created the royal crown to reward the strongest alpha or preserve the influence of powerful bloodlines. They had forged it as a promise that the kingdom would always remain protected by someone whose character placed compassion before pride, wisdom before ambition, and service before authority. The crown would recognize such a heart when the kingdom needed it most, regardless of title or expectation. A quiet murmur spread across the chamber as generations of misunderstanding suddenly became clear. The kingdom had spent centuries testing strength while the crown had patiently searched for humility. Nathaniel lowered his eyes for a moment, reflecting upon every failed ceremony he had witnessed throughout his life. None of those alphas had lacked courage, yet every ritual had asked them to prove something the crown had never been seeking. Clara remained standing before the pedestal, still holding the pendant with both hands. She listened with growing disbelief, unable to imagine that an ordinary life spent helping neighbors and gathering herbs could somehow be connected to an ancient promise. She softly admitted that she had never desired recognition or power. Everything she knew had come from her grandmother, who believed that kindness quietly changed lives even when no one noticed. Nathaniel smiled gently at those words because they echoed the newly revealed inscription almost perfectly. The king then addressed the assembled scholars and nobles with calm certainty rather than triumph. He declared that no decision about the future would be rushed simply because an extraordinary discovery had taken place. Truth deserved patience, and the kingdom would honor the ancient promise with wisdom instead of excitement. His measured response eased the uncertainty filling the room. No one felt pressured to celebrate something they had only begun to understand. Instead, curiosity gradually replaced doubt. The chief historian carefully documented every newly revealed inscription, while additional scholars compared the restored text with forgotten records stored throughout the castle. Every independent source pointed toward the same remarkable conclusion. Clara's family had quietly protected the final living symbol of the first guardians without realizing its true significance. Outside the chamber, evening sunlight washed across the towers of Evermont Castle, casting long golden shadows over the peaceful city below. Merchants closed their shops, children laughed along the cobblestone streets, and families gathered for supper, completely unaware that the foundation of their kingdom had quietly changed within the castle walls. Clara looked through the tall windows toward the familiar hills beyond the capital and wondered whether her grandmother had known far more than she had ever revealed. Behind her, the royal crown rested peacefully upon its marble pedestal once again. It no longer seemed distant or mysterious. It felt patient, as though it had finally fulfilled the first part of an ancient promise and was calmly waiting for the kingdom to discover what that promise would ask of everyone next. The days that followed brought a quiet transformation unlike anything Evermont had witnessed in living memory. King Nathaniel Ashford ordered every ancient record concerning the first guardians to be restored and shared openly with the royal council, ensuring that truth would no longer remain hidden beneath forgotten stone or fading parchment. Scholars worked side by side through long hours, confirming again and again that every rediscovered document told the same remarkable story. The royal crown had never existed to celebrate power alone. It had always waited for someone whose character reflected the values upon which the kingdom had first been built. Word of the discoveries gradually spread beyond the castle walls, carried by travelers, merchants, and historians rather than proclamations. At first, many people found the story difficult to believe. How could an ordinary Omega herb gatherer become connected to the oldest promise in the kingdom? Yet those who knew Clara Whitmore personally simply smiled. They spoke of the countless quiet acts of kindness she had shown over the years without expecting anything in return. They remembered the healing teas she prepared for strangers, the elderly neighbors she visited during harsh winters, and the children she encouraged whenever they doubted themselves. None of those moments had seemed extraordinary at the time. Together they revealed a life shaped by compassion instead of recognition. Clara herself asked for nothing to change. She returned to her cottage whenever the royal scholars no longer needed her assistance, continuing to gather herbs beneath the towering pines and walking the same peaceful forest paths she had loved since childhood. Whenever villagers thanked her with newfound admiration, she answered with the same gentle smile she had always offered. The attention surrounding her never altered the quiet grace with which she lived each ordinary day. Nathaniel visited the village several weeks later, not accompanied by a grand procession, but by only a few trusted advisors. Standing beneath the old oak tree outside Clara's cottage, he thanked her for reminding the entire kingdom that true leadership began long before anyone wore a crown. Clara answered with simple honesty, saying that every lesson she carried had first been taught by her grandmother, who believed that goodness planted quietly often grew into blessings no one could predict. The king's expression softened as he realized that the greatest strength in the kingdom had never announced itself. It had simply lived faithfully until destiny called its name. As autumn slowly gave way to winter, the royal crown remained upon its marble pedestal, no longer viewed as an impossible prize, but as a living promise that would guide future generations. Young alphas who once measured themselves only by strength began studying wisdom, patience, and service alongside courage. Omegas who had quietly accepted being overlooked found new confidence in knowing that dignity had never depended upon rank. Noble families discovered that honor could not be inherited unless it was also practiced. The kingdom itself grew steadier because its people finally understood that the future could not be secured by pride alone. One peaceful evening, as golden light faded beyond the hills surrounding Evermont, Clara stood outside her cottage watching the wind move gently through the tall grass. The familiar silver pendant rested against